All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Before we get into today's video, we have a sponsor for today's video, and that sponsor is The Ridge. As you probably know from our previous spots, they make high-quality wallets using metal and elastic, and with Father's Day on the way, they make the perfect gift for the father or father figure in your life. I've used and loved them for years, and I'm happy to say I'll be switching into one of the new premium designs between Damascus Steel and Forged Ember. And if you'd like to purchase one as a gift, even if that gift is to yourself, you can head over to theridge.com/brozime and use code brozime at checkout to get 10% off and help support the channel. Thanks so much to The Ridge for sponsoring us yet again, and let's get into the video. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. So, today we are going to be talking about the last 6 years of Prime Access. So we are on the wiki here, which is not quite completely updated. It doesn't have the very recent primes, but of course we've already talked about them. And I have a bunch of notes on here for all of the unique things about the last 6 years of Prime Accesses. So we're gonna get into it and kind of talk about the expectation of what Prime Access is and how impactful it can be, and some kind of results from myself from looking at this many Prime Accesses, which is about 44 items in total over the course of that time. Not counting, of course, the actual Prime Warframes themselves. So it's a lot to talk about. Let's just get into this and talk about what is going to be the kind of case here for each different item. So basically, weapons that were added to Prime Access that just have like statistical increases, I am writing nothing for, as there's nothing really unique about like, oh, this weapon is very slightly better. Like the Volnus has a little more damage. The Asla Prime is, a little more damage. Not really anything huge. Very small changes overall. So those are nothing primes, where they're better, but there's nothing really unique or interesting about them. They're just the better version of the weapon that they already were. And then we're also going to have detailed descriptions of like what's unique about any given weapon that does have a unique thing about it. So what we're going to do here is just go through. So first and foremost, we have the most recent access, which is Gara Prime, which has the Volnus and the Astala, both of which have nothing unique about them. And then we have the Octavia PA, which actually does have 2 unique abilities, theoretically, for the Pandera Prime and the Tenora Prime. Both of them have an Octavia signature ability, and that is that 20% reload speed on headshot kills with the alternate fire for the Pandera, and then 20% chance to refill the magazine with the alternate fire headshots from the Tenora Prime. So those are passives. Technically, they're not particularly useful, and they only apply to one Warframe, so it's kind of hard to tell whether or not you really should count them, because that's very, very minor. But it is unique things about the Tenora and Pandera Prime. Technically, whether or not you count these, I think, is a little bit up in the air, though, as it is only applying to one Warframe. Next, we have the Guandao and the Zaki Prime, both of which have nothing. And then we have the Panthera Prime, which does have saw blades that can explode, and even though the Panthera Prime is not very good, it does have unique saw blade exploding action, so that is something new that it does. Then we have the Karst Prime, which has nothing really new added. Then after that, we have the Corinth Prime, which does have some significant changes, actually. It has the Air Burst mode changed to be a manual detonation with a longer range on these explosions. So that's much more interesting. And in addition to that, it actually has the different reload mechanism of reloading the entire magazine instead of one shell at a time, which, sparked a huge debate in terms of what people like more or less. But it is a significant change for the Corinth Prime. And then the Pangolin Prime and the XS got nothing. Then we have the Baza Prime and the Axamati Prime, both heavily generic weapons that didn't get anything. And then the Tekka Prime and the Death Cube Prime, both of which got nothing. And then the Zouge and the Ninkandi. And this is another debatable point on whether or not one of these got something. For the Zouge, it definitely did. The bolts that you fire out explode short a little bit after impact. And that is completely different from what the regular Zouge functions as, and I think is generally pretty useful. The Ninkandi Prime, on the other hand, basically got nothing in my opinion, but they did add IPS. So it does have impact, puncture, and slash on it, along with the electrical damage. So whether or not you consider that to be a big difference or not, I think is kind of up to personal taste. For me personally, I wouldn't consider it to be a huge change overall, but it is something that they did. So count it for yourself if you want to, and it'll be relevant at the end here. Then we have the Stratovar Prime, which adds punch through on the semi-auto fire, and the Typedo Prime got nothing. And it's also a little bit debatable, I would say, on the Stradivar Prime, whether or not that punch through is like just a statistical increase or not, but it is increasing it from 0, so I would generally consider it to be a statistical increase. Then we have the Axe Jagera and the Redeemer Prime, which both got nothing. Notable, of course, that the Redeemer Prime is still and has been since it released one of the best weapons in the game. So whether or not you consider that to be a relevant factor here can matter. And then we have the Rubico Prime and the Grand Prime, both of which also got nothing. Once again, the Rubico Prime, very, very good. And then we have the probably maybe the most unique Prime weapon that has ever been on a Prime Access, and also like maybe the most interesting and the most impactful build around is the Piranha Prime, where 3 quick consecutive kills adds a second Akimbo Piranha Prime that adds ammunition to the magazine and increases fire rate, both of which are doublings of the ammo and the fire rate. This, of course, creates a build with, the infinite ammo firing that you can do with the Piranha Prime, along with the Arcane that makes it so you have full ammo efficiency for your secondary whenever you get headshot kills. That, combined with the specifics of this passive where it adds the ammo back to your magazine whenever you get that second Piranha, means that you can sustain it for incredibly long amounts of time as long as there's tons of enemies that you can kill fairly quickly with the initial magazine with just the one Piranha. The moment you go into that mode, you are unloading extreme amounts of rounds, and it's a very unique build just in terms of secondaries in general. And it's like the most unique use case as well for that Arcane set. Creating a very, very cool build that I do have a video on if you want to check it out. Then the Distressor Prime, on the other hand, from this access, got nothing. And then right below that, we have the Tiburon Prime, which had 2 fire modes added, the semi-auto and the full auto modes, both which have completely unique stats and are kind of for different functions, so that was neat. And then the Cronin Prime, while notable that it is one of the best weapons in the game right now, didn't get anything. Then we have the Ekbolto and the Kogake, both of which got nothing. Then we have the Ballistica Prime, where charge shot kills specifically create ghosts that will fight alongside the user. This is a passive that comes close to the uniqueness of the Piranha Prime passive, I think, but the difference is majorly that it's just not useful at all. However, I will say that I really would rather have a very unique passive that's not useful at all, as opposed to nothing, which is what the Namaskilla got. Moving on, we have the Sylvan Aegis Prime, notable once again for being one of the best weapons in the game, and then the Sybaris Prime, both of which got nothing. And then the Euphona Prime, I am considering to be heavily unique here because it was a brand new weapon. You can't really get much more unique than being whole cloth, a completely new thing. So the Euphona Prime is very, very unique. And, you kind of have to put it on the list of unique additions to the Prime stuff because it's its own brand new thing. And then Helios Prime got nothing for that Prime access. And then we have the Cernus Prime, which is also very unique. This Prime access, probably overall the most unique access in general, with the Cernus Prime firing multiple arrows vertically or horizontally, and it can toggle between them, much like Ivara can choose which way she's shooting her arrows. And then the Venka Prime, which has a higher maximum combo multiplier, which is still useful to this day with Warframes like Baruch, who want to keep up a very, very high combo through Naramon to get their big bonuses off of their Blood Rush-like effects. So those are both very, very good and unique. Then we have the Tigris Prime and the Gallatin Prime, both of which got nothing. Now, obviously, these are from 2016, and at the time, I, of course, remember the hype from these being announced at TennoCon. These were some of, the regular Gallatin and the Tigris Prime were very much loved by the community. And the Tigris Prime reigned supreme for a very long time as one of the very best weapons in the game. But also, there weren't any, crazy unique mechanics about either of these on release. And then the Fragor Prime, which we now have as an initial combo count 30 weapon, which is very, very good and interesting and, kind of makes it one of the very few, very heavy attack focused weapons in the game. And then we have the Axolotl Prime, which got nothing. And then we have the Nikana Prime and the Spear Prime, which got nothing. And the Dual Comba Prime and the Kavas Prime from the Eternity Prime access, which got nothing. So, going over all those, we end up with, 6 years abouts of history with 44 Prime items. And of those, we have 13 unique Primes and 31 nothing Primes. And if you adjust for the Octavia passive, which I personally would, you get 11 unique Primes and 33 nothing Primes, which brings you to only 25% of all Primes released in the last 6 years having anything particularly unique about them. And I think I was fairly generous with what I was considering to be a unique thing, adding punch through on the Stradivar and stuff being considered, and all those little very small statistical changes, and even weapons that are of course very bad, having the exploding saw blades. That weapon's not good and it hasn't been good since release. Even weapons that are bad, I considered what is unique about them rather than whether or not they were good in terms of their power level for the game. So that I think is also consideration. Keep in mind, if you are considering the Ninkandi for this, if you're being very, very generous, I think you can get to 14 unique primes and 30 nothing primes, but that really doesn't help very much statistically from what we're looking at overall over the course of the last 6 years. We're looking at most of the time, you're not going to get a unique prime item. And I think that speaks to maybe a larger and different problem that I have maybe been talking about recently, because for the longest time, the thing that I was talking about was I wish that they would go back to the way that they did primes before when speaking about stuff like the Piranha Prime and how interesting it is and how cool it is and how much I like it and just like all these great things about the Piranha Prime and how that is like, you know, such a good example of how things were back in 2018. But realistically, things were never really that way. It's just that the Piranha Prime is probably like the pinnacle of like the most interesting things have ever gotten in a Prime access, and that's what makes me think about it that way. So I set out with the intention of like, you know, looking at this and like examining all the unique things about this history and like really going into how it used to be. And I ended up in a different place than I expected, where I found out through just, you know, looking at the actual raw data of it, that things were never actually that unique. We've had little pips of like really interesting stuff happen, and it hasn't been that way consistently. So I think that the bigger like takeaway from this video and this information that I have is I think that DE needs to make these things more consistently interesting. And I don't mean that every single prime item needs to come out and be this kind of like unique thing that has like a whole cloth special, like, you know, everything special about it. It's crazy. It's like this nuts new mechanic or anything of that nature, because doing that for every single prime item is probably kind of a lot, even though Prime Access has only come out once every 3 months or so. But I would really love to see it hit a 50% instead of a 25%, which, if you think about it, of course, is double what we're doing now. You know, if we had 50% right now, we'd have 22 unique primes instead of 11. But I think being able to get to that 50% would make these Prime Accesses much more interesting and a lot less of a downer whenever we get stuff like this Gara Prime Access, where I really like Gara, I really do. She's great, and like this isn't really commentary on the actual Warframe in any of these Prime Accesses, because it always just depends on what the regular Warframe is and if that Warframe is good and if the new Prime looks cool. Like that's really the determining factor for the actual Warframe itself. But for the weapons, it's really disappointing to like be like, oh, it's a Volnus and oh, it's an Astala, and they're both just what they are with very slightly higher numbers. That's really tough to be interested in. And I think, you know, I mean, I've suggested, of course, I've already talked about like the Volnus Prime potentially, you know, it's a big glass hammer having a passive where if you get to a certain combo multiplier and then heavy attack, the glass explodes, hitting a much larger area and dealing more damage or something along those lines. Even a very simple passive like that, which I would regard as very simple, of course, would make it like, oh, this is like a cool build around that we can do. And that cool build around is going to create an interesting thing to do with these weapons. It's like an impetus for experimentation. And that's more so what I would like to see more of, because it's not necessarily going to make the Volnus suddenly this absolutely insane, super crazy weapon that's like, you know, the most meta thing in the world. And that's not really what I want. I just want the Prime weapons to come out and like have at least one of them be new or at least feel new, right? Because like they are new. They're primes. They look really cool. Both of them do, but they don't do anything that really feels new at all. And that's the part that really gets to me and disappoints me whenever a Prime Access comes around. And it's felt like that for a while. Like if we look at the past 3, I would consider, you know, nothing, nothing, and nothing. And that's 9 months of nothing, because I'm not going to consider the Octavia passives, because I don't know that I ever knew that they had this on Octavia in particular. That might just have been information that totally passed me by, and because they're only on Octavia, it's such a narrow thing that most people are probably not going to experience unless you're like maining Octavia. And we all know that like the general community sentiment, at least that I've heard, is that people don't want to play Octavia because when you play Octavia, you're managing timers and you're not really playing like Warframe, which, you know, some people want to do that, but a lot of people don't. And you're certainly not going to be using the special passives of guns when you're managing timers instead of like playing. But yeah, and it's like, you know, outside of Saw Blades can explode, that's an entire year of kind of nothing primes, which feels like a very long time, especially whenever the Saw Blades can explode. was not on a very good weapon for us to actually really be using. But yeah, that's kind of just some interesting stuff here. Some stuff that I came across and wanted to talk about because I think it's interesting looking back on what we can expect going forward. And it's unfortunate that like the findings from looking at this stuff is that we can't expect new primes to be interesting. Like maybe after a run of like a whole year of like fairly uninteresting primes, and maybe that 25% needs to come out to play. And like I hope that's what we get going forward is a lot more interesting stuff because I think it really spices things up and makes the prime access better. But yeah, let me know if I like missed anything. There's like, there's always the possibility that I missed a few things here. I don't think it's going to really like change the weight of the percentage of like what's unique to what's not in any super major way. But let me know what you guys think about like the prime accesses and if this is like maybe surprising information for you, because for me it was like a kind of a realization that prime accesses have been kind of always a little bland, and then with sparks of like really cool stuff, like with just sparks of really cool stuff. But yeah, that's gonna do it for today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you tomorrow.